we dive into today's conversation, I want to gently set the tone for this conversation because this is one of those stories that can quietly shift how you see healing, diagnosis, and yourself. Sean Blackwell is today's guest, and he is a holotropic breathwork facilitator and the author of Bipolar Awakenings. And for nearly 2 decades, Sean has been walking alongside people who have been told that their struggles are permanent, their labels fixed, and their only option is to manage rather than heal. What he offers is something radically different. He invites people to explore the spiritual and emotional roots beneath bipolar experiences, not as pathology, but as a potential awakening. So let's begin at the beginning with Sean's story and how his personal journey led him to question everything he was taught about bipolar disorder and discover a path of healing that now supports so many others. Welcome back to the Metamorphosis Project podcast. I'm your host, Tina Eichenberg, and today I have with me Sean Blackwell. Sean, thank you so much for coming onto the show. I am very excited about this. I want to hear your story from wherever you want to start, wherever you're comfortable starting.
Okay. Well, hi, Tina, and thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And my story, well, typically people want to know, well, how did I get into this field? You know, I've written 2 books on the subject. One is about what happened to me, and that book is called Am I Bipolar or Waking Up?
Mm-hmm.
And then the second book is about how I've gone on to help other people and the techniques I've developed and things like that. That book's called Bipolar Awakenings, The Quest to Heal Bipolar Disorder, okay? So they sort of divide up sort of the two parts of my life, really, you know? And the first one really goes from 1995 until 2007. And then the second book goes from 2007 until really pretty much now, you know,
Right.
because the second book was written in 2024, you know. My mother told me to stop. I live in Brazil, so I don't have regular contact with English. And she told me, would you stop saying 2000? Nobody says 2024 anymore, just 2024. And I said, okay.
You're right, but yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's so interesting. I never thought of that.
I've given myself an autocorrect there. Okay. I'm talking to an American audience. So
you know what? I didn't even notice that you said 2024.
okay.
I didn't even notice. So I would not worry about you. Just talk how you talk. It's
okay.
fine.
I talk how I talk. Well, if your audience hears anything strange coming out of me, it's because I've been in Brazil for the last 20 years.
Wow.
I live near a city called Santos, which was the home of Pele and Neymar, so it's got a rich soccer history. Not that I enjoy soccer, I do not. I prefer NFL football. I'm Canadian originally, you know.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm originally from Toronto.
Okay.
So yeah, and I guess I'll go back to, so where did this whole thing start? Was I was struggling in my 20s, dealing with kind of an on again, off again, mild mid depression. And I always thought it was related to my career. And so I took an intensive self-help course called the Landmark Forum. Have you ever heard of it? It's pretty common.
I have not.
Okay. And it's like a 3 or 4 day, actually it's a 5-day thing, which is quite confrontational in the way they sort of deal with you. And there's 150 people in the room. And on the second day of this course, they had us do an intensive meditation on our fear, but not, I don't know why I said intensive. It was only a 5-minute meditation. It was quite short, but they asked us to all focus on our fear. And when I did that, I didn't think I felt any fear until I saw the depth gauge from my scuba diving equipment. And I had a scuba diving accident 2 months earlier where I lost my weight belt 90 feet below sea level. And that led to me shooting to the surface. And when I was looking at my depth gauge, I was wondering if I would be alive by the time I got to the surface, because with a rapid ascent like that, you can get an air embolism that can
Right.
get into your bloodstream, and then that goes to your brain and you're dead, you know.
Wow.
And so all of a sudden, all the fear of that moment came up. I had been traumatized by that accident. Um, and I felt this fear and it came over me. I'm shaking, I'm trembling, I'm crying. And by the time that was done, there was a sense of huge relief, but all my senses had sharpened. And this was only about a 5 minute meditation, but all my senses had sharpened. I could see detailing curtains I couldn't see before. Sense of smell was sharper, was much more emotional. Went home that night and was opening up about family issues that I hadn't talked about ever.
Hmm.
And that space, I sort of stayed in this sort of really vulnerable, open, spiritual space for the next 5 days until on the last day of the course, I realized that I had a sense of knowingness. Like I felt like I finally knew things that I never knew before. Previously, I felt like I was always missing something. And then with that, um, I realized that this is the information I would get when I was dead. And I made the connection that I had died in the scuba diving accident. And that then I just thought I died. And
Right.
that the whole course and everything was some sort of in between world between heaven and earth, and that I was in some sort of purgatory where I was being tested by God. And so with that, I went into an adjacent ballroom. The course was taking place at a ballroom. And in that ballroom, I prepared myself to meet God in a more pure state and took off all my clothes and started to look for some sort of a portal to get through to the other side. And I felt energies leaving my body a piece at a time. And when the whole process was over, by then the police had come and they had gotten me ready and put me in a stretcher because I refused to put my clothes back on. Put me in a stretcher and took me to the psychiatric hospital. And I still thought I was being tested by God. And even at the hospital, I'm talking to everybody. I wasn't taking anything seriously until they forcibly injected me. They had like four security guards put their hands on me and give me a forced injection. And then I started to think, well, God wouldn't test me like that. And I did get some sleep. I think the injection was a sedative. It was a horrible experience. It felt like being raped.
Traumatic,
Uh,
traumatic in itself.
yeah. It's a horrible thing to do to somebody. And then um, I think it was about 48 hours later. 48 hours later, I woke up and I didn't know where I was exactly, but I knew I just needed to tell them what they needed to hear, and I needed to get out of this place. And so that's what happened. And my family was there, and my family was supportive, and they just took me home. I was very lucky. I was able to be discharged from the hospital within 4 days because I
Okay.
told them, I said, my name is Sean, and this is my family. And I think I've had a PTSD reaction to a scuba diving accident that I had. And I thought that would impress them too. But when I went home, I was like, okay, so what happened to me? Because for me, I didn't have a mental illness. I
Hmm.
had a spiritual experience and
Right.
it felt like a breakthrough. And I had one friend from the family that was very supportive. And I just spent the next few months trying to figure out what happened to me and I felt much better. Even though I didn't want to see people, I was still vulnerable. And then I returned to work. You know, I'd been sort of so frustrated with my job for the previous 4 or 5 years. And I went back to work and my career just took off, you know, and got the job I wanted, traveling all over the place. Everything I touched turned to gold. Um, my salary tripled over the next 3 years. The only paradox was by the time I got to the hospital, I didn't want to be in advertising anymore. I'd been in advertising. I didn't want to be there. But
Right.
I had no choice. I went back to advertising. And when I did, everything just got so much better. It was incredible. Um, and that was really the beginning. One thing leads to another. I meet a Brazilian woman when I'm in Peru. I felt like I was being called to Peru. Like, why am I here? And I'm looking for a way out of advertising. And we had the same birthday and we click. And one thing leads to another, and I moved to Brazil in 2000. We got married in 2000, and we moved to Brazil a year later, 2002, end of 2002. And I became an English teacher, and my life gets a whole lot better. We both became English teachers, and I felt free and comfortable, and we were making more money than you would think, and everything was great.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like a happy ending. But then she had, my wife's name is Leisha. We were recently divorced a year ago, but we remain friends.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a niece in 2007 that had an episode, and the family called us and said what's going on with Anna. I refer to her as Anna in my book, changed the names, of course, for privacy.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing the symptoms, and I'm like, well, that doesn't sound like a mental illness. That sounds like what happened to me. It sounds like she's having all these spiritual kind of things going on. And when we went up and to work with her in a way to be supportive, I didn't see a difference between what was going on with her and what had happened to me. And they were giving it the diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And I didn't know anything about bipolar disorder.
Right.
They had told me I possibly had a bipolar diagnosis, but I just ignored them. I didn't know what that was 10 years earlier. So this time I'm like, okay, so what is this thing bipolar? And I start to do some research online, and I see that a lot of people who are having spiritual experiences are being diagnosed with bipolar, and it's being medicated for life, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that there is this history. Oh, and then this goes back. I need to backtrack a little bit. And sorry, it's a long story, but if I get it out
Okay.
of the way, we can move on, with other questions and things. A year after my experience, I had found the work of a doctor named Dr. Stanislav Grof, and he had a term called spiritual emergency, which he said there's this thing that can happen to people that looks like schizophrenia in his language, but these days, acute psychosis tends to be labeled bipolar disorder.
Mm-hmm.
But it looks like schizophrenia, or it looks like an acute psychosis, um, but it's actually a spiritual process that if you let it work through, it can be very beneficial to the person. And he called that a spiritual emergency, like a spiritual experience that's difficult to integrate. And so for me, I was like, well, that's what happened to me. I had a spiritual
Right.
emergency, and it was very validating. And at the time, I was like, well, spiritual emergency is over here, mental illness is over there, two completely different things. So when this is happening to my niece, or my wife's niece, I'm thinking, well, this is a spiritual emergency. This isn't a bipolar disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to do the research, and then I learned that there were some pioneering psychiatrists and psychologists from the 60s and 70s who saw all of psychosis as as an intended reorganization of the psyche. And there were clinics in the 70s and 80s where if you were in your first episode of acute psychosis, you could go to these clinics and they would support you without medication. And they reported a very high success rate. One clinic called Soteria House by Dr. Lauren Mosher, another called Diabasis by Dr. John Ware Perry. If you were in acute psychosis, you would go and stay in these homes. And these doctors had also learned that empathetic college undergrads were better at helping people work through a psychosis than trained PhDs. And the reason was that in moments of high stress, because people in psychosis can be very difficult, there's no
Mm-hmm.
question. But in
Right.
moments of high stress, the PhDs would pull rank. They would say, hey, listen, I'm the doctor. You need to listen to me. You need to sit down. And that would break the relationship and break the healing process. Whereas the undergrads, the empathetic undergrads would
Right.
be like, look, you're scaring me right now. Could we just sit down and have something to eat? Like more of a non-hierarchical orientation. And when I read that, I was like, we can help her work through these things. And treating any kind of acute psychosis as a spiritual emergency
Right.
became what I was thinking we could try. And then if we fail, she's on the meds for life anyways. So what do we have to lose, right? Because I'm
Right.
I'm learning you're going to get medicated for life. At that time, her sister comes back from Europe, knows the story, Eliana. Within a few days of being back from Europe, she goes into acute psychosis.
My
So
goodness.
two sisters, having their first episodes of acute psychosis 4 months apart. And with Eliana, she contacted us first,
Hmm.
and we supported her without meds in our apartment. And we were able to take her back to her family after about 5 days in a much better grounded state. She would go on to have one other episode that got medicated, but then the third, we agreed with the family to support her through ahead of time, and we did. And after that, she was able to return to university, meds free. She never saw a psychiatrist and finished top of her class, graduated with honors, went on and got a great job.
Right.
Now, in 7 years, she would start to have other experiences, okay? But at that time, it was just a huge validation for my wife and I. We were like, this is it. And for me, it was like, well, this is my life calling.
Hmm.
And so then I started to make videos online on YouTube. My first video was called Am I Bipolar or Waking Up? And that video shared my story, knowing that it had been a spiritual breakthrough for me. And then the feedback I got was, hey, man, your experience is not so different from what I had. I'm medicated for life. I'm
Right.
diagnosed bipolar, medicated for life. And this became like a life mission for me. And that was 2007. So I've been at this for 18 years, and that was the beginning. That's the origin story. How did the Hulk become the Incredible Hulk? Well, that's how.
Well, I think a lot of people, when they are looking for ways to heal that do not include lifetime medication, they kind of want to resonate with the before, right? They want to understand the story of where you're now helping people.
Hmm.
And it's I think it's fantastic that you were able to help these two women and yourself, because obviously you've helped yourself kind of with this same process of was it your wife, have you had to go through this process yourself again like you did the first time?
Not exactly. For me, the first time was like a very powerful breakthrough.
Mm-hmm.
And then that was the end of my psychiatric issues.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
I never visited a psychiatrist. I was never medicated. I never visited a psychologist. In 2009, I went on an intensive 10-day meditation retreat and had a Kundalini awakening, which was
Mm-hmm.
even more powerful energetically. But I knew what was going on, and I was able to
Right.
work through that. You
Right.
know,
And that's I think
so.
that's what I was getting to, is that you, because of that first initial experience that you had, you
Mhm.
knew if you had other heightened experiences, you had the awareness of what was going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
that,
well, and the education that I gave myself in preparing to help my
right,
nieces really clarified it for me so that when I had powerful Kundalini experiences in the future, like on
yeah,
this meditation, I knew what was happening that time around. Even though I was scared to death, I was like, oh my
right.
God, is this going to put me in the hospital? But I was able to work through. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's fair. That's Our bodies don't always, our conscious mind doesn't always understand what our body's going through, and it can be incredibly
No.
scary.
Yeah, and I think the scariest part, and they've known this. This goes back to R.D. Laing in the 1960s. Is the psychosis is an intended reorganization of the psyche.
Right.
So think about that. Something higher than your mind is reorganizing your mind.
Yeah.
Okay. So they
Yeah.
didn't talk about it in the 60s, but the implication was there that God is doing this to us. Now, what is God? That's a mystery.
Yeah, it's different for everybody.
But it's smart, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
And it does things to us that, when I was in the hospital, like handcuffed to the bed, I saw an image of a fox going back and forth along a tree line, dodging back and forth. And I said to myself, I said, God is crazy like a fox.
Oh,
And
absolutely. Got to be.
Yeah, and the inclination was the fox looked crazy going back and forth in my vision, but what the fox was doing was trying to confuse the sheep so that they could attack when the sheep doesn't know where they're coming from.
Right.
So there was an intelligence to the fox that we couldn't see. And there's an intelligence to what God is doing in acute psychosis that we clearly do not see right
Well,
now.
the way I'm looking at it is that it is a disruption. It's a disruption to the life that you're currently leading so that you can see a different perspective and shift your path. And most human beings kind of shut that part of them off. And so for them, it's abnormal to see other people having those experiences.
Sure, I mean that's a big part of it is breaking the normalcy, just breaking what regular is supposed to be.
Right. Right.
For sure, which
Yeah.
I think you're getting at.
Yeah, because what most people consider normal is more of at least what I'm coming to realize is it's more of a control tactic. It's we can't let people just be who they are because
Mhm.
it's not comfortable for everybody to have to deal with.
Mhm.
And you having that experience allowed you to come into a space where you were comfortable enough to be able to help other people who were having those experiences and holding space for them.
Sure, sure. And in the beginning, like from the, after 4 months of research, I had studied Dr. Stan Grof's work quite extensively. I had read 6 of his books and that kind of thing. But when it came to the history of working with people in acute psychosis, it was like a 4 month education and talking to some people online. And then I was ready to go. And we worked with people voluntarily from the very beginning. And I was comfortable. My wife and I were both, she had a history of working with people in non ordinary states as well. It's
Mhm.
a whole other story, but it came from her psychology education. And we were both comfortable working with people in non ordinary states. But the trick was that when people were in some sort of acute psychosis of some kind, that it did need a greater therapeutic container than just the two of us
Right.
against like staying with people for like a weekend. We needed more than that. And the families were never supportive of what we were doing. Just
Hmm.
never. And we were quite anti-psychiatry at the time. I had some resentment over what happened to me. And so it was kind of a combative kind of feeling that we eventually, after a few years, we just realized that this was not working. And I needed to take a step back and create a more structured program that was going to keep me out of jail, you know.
Right.
And that's what the second book is about. Bipolar Awakenings is about the development of working with people in acute psychosis up until the creation of a private healing retreat that I started doing for people, and then how the work developed through what I learned on this healing retreat that I was doing with people, you know.
So can you walk us through that second book? Walk us through what you're doing now, how you
Okay.
assist others in their journeys, based off of your experiences and everything you've learned.
Okay. And I like the way you're asking your questions because they seem to come from like this is what you want to know. This isn't something that's like on a list of questions. This
No,
is
no,
like
that's
really
very organic. Well,
you really
I
want to know the
figure
answer.
if I ask it, somebody wants to know it. It's not just me.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Well, so the book, Bipolar Awakenings, The Quest to Heal Bipolar Disorder, it starts with a recap of my first book, what happened to me, my work with my nieces and all that. And then it gets into a series of stories that when you read these stories of working, when I originally worked with people in acute psychosis, the stories are just nuts. I mean, the stories are just like, did this really happen to this guy? Is he's really like one of my stories, I'm working with the friend of a family friend, and she's got a pretty big property, and she's a shaman, and he is running around a tennis court she's got in her backyard, naked in the rain. And I've got a drum, and I'm sort of drumming just in support of him just running around this tennis court naked, you know. And
Right.
then he's eating plants in the backyard, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Dogs purify their stomachs by eating plants. I'm purifying myself." I'm like, "Okay, I hope it's not poisonous," you know,
Right,
this kind of
right.
thing.
Well, I mean,
You
and
know?
it sounds like, I mean, my philosophy is that if it's not hurting you, it's not hurting anybody else, go for it. Right? Running around
Yeah,
a tennis court and eating weeds,
yeah.
as long as they're not poisonous,
Yeah.
is not hurting anybody.
Yeah. And I did not know if there was any poisonous plants out there, I'll be quite honest. So I was taking a bit of a risk, but the running around the tennis court was completely cool, you
Yeah.
know. And then he would say to us, like, "Sean, could you and Leisha please take off your clothes too?" And we just said, David, I'm not that comfortable with that. He says,
Right.
"Okay." You
And then
know,
you move on.
yeah. And with him, he was my face was morphing into Kevin Spacey. I was hallucinating for him. I was turning into Kevin Spacey, and within 48 hours, all his hallucinations had dissipated.
Yeah.
You know, they'd all gone away, you know. But we were being treated like thieves in the night. The family was threatening to call the police on us and things like that. And yet we didn't want to turn them over to psychiatry, you know. So it
Right.
was like this big thing. So after working with him, I realized we needed more
More
structure.
structure. Yeah.
And Groff had a technique called holotropic breath work,
Hmm.
which realized that the roots of many problems in our lives for regular people, but for people with disorders as well, is trauma. And that
Yeah.
the trauma is held in the body somatically. And that with holotropic breath work, you can help to release that trauma. And with that, people become healthier. You know, they become more well adjusted. Um, and I had done holotropic breath work years earlier on a retreat with him, a particular weekend. And I thought, well, maybe this might help, you know, because I had seen my niece Eliana over breathing, and it seemed to help her spontaneously. She started to do a style of breath work, and it seemed to help her, you know. So I started to think, well, what if, because holotropic breath work was contraindicated for people with bigger disorders like bipolar disorder. And the reason was that Groff didn't feel like the therapeutic container of a group setting was strong enough for somebody with a disorder. And so I was like, well, what if we put people on retreats, private? So just me and my client, and we stay together for a certain amount of time. And so my first retreat, which happened in 2013, was 3 weeks long, just me and
Wow.
my client and her volunteer. And I added an extra week, like the 2 weeks, 2 weeks for the therapeutic work, and 1 week just in case she went into psychosis, and I would have a week to get her back from,
Hmm.
you know, before I had to take her to the psychiatric hospital. So that was
Right.
the idea. And it worked out pretty much like that. Like after 2 weeks of doing breath work related work, it wasn't holotropic breath work, but it was a modification I called bipolar breath work. We did that on again and off again for about 2 weeks, and then she was gassed. She couldn't go any further. And in the future, I made my retreats 2 weeks because I realized that they were very safe and people couldn't handle more than 2 weeks. That was as
Hmm.
much healing as they could deal with, you know. So that started in 2013. And then that technique, the retreat process, continued to be modified and tweaked over the next 6 years. I kept going back and researching, experimenting, researching, experimenting. Most of these retreats happened in Europe, a few in the US, but most of it was in Europe. And yeah, and then from there, I realized that some good work can happen at a distance as well.
Hmm.
That it's not a woo thing; it actually happens. And so, like, I had a what I call distance surrogate breathwork session with a client just last night. Um, and so, and there's other distance work that I can do with people as well to help them work through their process. So it's the whole book is like this development of like going from the retreat process and then making the retreat process more efficient, more sophisticated, and then the distance work as well, more efficient, more sophisticated, that kind of thing.
Yeah, breath work is huge. We as human beings do not breathe adequately. I mean, it's
Hmm.
something that our
Hmm.
subconscious mind does without us having to think about it, or we just naturally breathe. We don't have to think about breathing. But when you pay attention to where are you breathing from, how long are you breathing, it makes a huge difference. And the way our body stores things is we're supercomputers. And
Yeah, it's all held throughout the body, you know.
absolutely, yeah, one of my favorite books is The Body Keeps the Score. That was the first
Okay.
one of the first books I ever read when I was starting on my healing journey. Um,
Mm.
so someone listening to this is feeling is resonating with everything that you're saying. What steps can they take to to get in touch with you? Just what should they be looking for? Obviously go to your website, reach out to you, but like, is there any text, books aside from your own that um, would help them understand a little bit of what's going on with them?
It's a little bit tricky because when it comes to bipolar disorder, like I'm pretty much the pioneer.
Okay, good. Good.
I'm kind of the guy. Stan Grof's work, Dr. Stan Grof's work is foundational to what I've done.
Yeah.
Okay. But it does take on a little bit, it's not so specific to people with a disorder. So
Mhm.
he's got a book from the 90s called The Stormy Search for the Self, which was
Right.
very pivotal to my understanding of what happened to me, you know. And so, if you were looking to understand your own experience as a spiritual emergency, that's the
Yeah.
one. But after reading that book, I thought my experience of spiritual emergency was like one in 20,000 people. Then, once I got to know about bipolar disorder, I realized that my one in 20,000 was actually more like one in 20, one in 30, like
Hmm.
that it was really common, you
Yeah.
know. And so, my work is the one that really drives into this gray area. And so when people call me and they want to know, well, what's going on with me? They often think, do I have a mental disorder or am I having a spiritual experience? I tell them, I say, you're having a bipolar awakening.
Hmm.
And if you treat it seriously, take it seriously,
Right.
it can be a breakthrough in your life. But for most people, they were a lot more traumatized than I was. They've got a lot more difficult family history and they probably don't have the same kind of tools that I had in place, like
Hmm.
internal,
Right.
to go through this because I was able to work through my process in a psychiatric hospital, which is completely hostile to what I was trying to accomplish.
Hmm.
Generally, people are not able to do that, you know.
Right.
But with the right support, the work is actually very simple. It's just not easy, you know. And you know, we talk about breath work. Breath work can be people can talk about breath work as almost like a style of meditation. But
Hmm.
when you're doing holotropic breath work or that like related to holotropic breath work requires a trained facilitator who's had ample training to do this work. They need to be educated in the kind of body work necessary because trauma brings up certain physical conditions that
Yeah.
need to be attended to. There's no particular breathing style. It's done on a yoga mat with aggressive breathing, and you need a very safe setting. And so the person that you do this work with needs to know what they're doing. You know, you need a trained facilitator to
Yeah.
do this work.
Absolutely.
And when people call me and they say, "Well, I tried holotropic breath work and didn't really work for me," I'm like, "What did you do?" "Well, I laid down on my bed and I started to breathe. You know, like I followed this YouTube video." And I'm like, "That's not holotropic breath work. You did not do the technique you did, because the main thing about breath work is not the breathing. And this is why it's a big misnomer. It's the set and the setting. And the reason that it's the set and the setting is because the healing agent is divine intelligence. And the divine intelligence will know if you're prepared for healing or not. And
Right.
if you're not prepared for healing, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. You'll get the heal. One of my favorite quotes is that you're gonna get the healing that you're meant to get. And if you're not
Yeah.
putting in the correct amount of effort and work, you're gonna get the healing that you were meant to get because you're not putting
Yeah.
in that work. But
Yeah.
I love the
But part of that work is preparation.
it
You
is.
need to be prepared. You need to know what you're doing, you
Right,
know?
right. Because
Yeah.
who knows? I mean, because if you start freaking, you don't know what you're doing and you start to have these sensations and they start to scare you, you need to have someone there who is trained in these things to say, you're okay, you're safe.
Yeah. And
And
also to
that's
know
where that
when you're
support
not
comes from.
okay. And also to know when you're not okay, because sometimes
Right.
you need to be protected
Yeah.
against your own will.
Yeah.
You know, there are certain situations where you will need to be grabbed physically. And the person breathing needs to know
Yeah.
that hey, if you come off this mat, we're going to grab you, okay? Like you need to stay on this mat,
Right.
period.
Right. And that's where I think that that support in the very beginning needs to come from is they need to find their support system.
Yeah.
They need to not just have you in their corner, but other people as well that especially if it's remote sessions, they need to have that support in their physical location to
Sure. Yeah.
help them through all of this as well.
Yeah. And I created a training program last year to help people to put people in this situation. And it was a total flop. I don't know what happened. I guess I don't know, maybe the timing's just wrong or something, but I spent 6 months creating a course and I had a lot of people take the course, but I didn't have a single person who actually wanted to do the work with
Hmm.
me supporting them online,
Right.
training a secondary supporter so we could start to lean into this work in a safe way. I didn't have a single taker. And that was a wake up call. That was like, whoa.
That's you know, a lot of people are still in the space where they don't trust themselves to do the work.
I think so. I think
You
so.
know, it's very hard for people to take accountability for their own healing. They still want others to do it for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was a challenge in developing the retreat is I would have some people who would think of me as like a guru and just want to make their problems go away. You know, they
Hmm.
wouldn't realize they would have to face themselves to a certain
Right.
degree,
Yep.
you know? So
Yeah.
that's definitely a part of it. The last podcast interview I gave, the guy, he had a bipolar diagnosis and he said to me, he goes, "Oh no, man, I'm not opening that door. There's a lot down there I don't want to see." I was like, finally, somebody who's honest.
Right. Right. Well, absolutely. I mean, because there can be a lot of stuff that we don't, that can be very uncomfortable for us to face.
Yeah, it can be very painful. It,
Yeah.
it can
But
be. Yeah, go ahead.
that's why you have that support system in place, right? That's
Yeah,
why you should have somebody that you can talk to about things that is not family, that you can get help and support from when things that are uncomfortable come up, that
right.
is prepared to be able to listen and hold space for you.
Hmm. And one thing we learned on the retreats as well, and this is what I do at a distance, is that if you have people with you on the retreat that are empathetic, the healing field can send them energy that's part of your unconscious material. Um, and this was really went against my training because we were trained that it's your own inner healer. You need to work through your own material. You need to do the work for you. But then all of a sudden, I'm taking on energies quite inadvertently,
Yeah.
and I'm realizing the inner healer is actually a healing field.
Yeah.
And so typically on my retreats, I would start to do what I called surrogate breath work after my clients. So my client would breathe and then I would breathe on their behalf. And now I do that at a distance for people. So I'll do a style of breath work. I don't have a facilitator with me, but I do a style of breath work where I'm working through other people's processes, and then their material gets filtered through not just the 2 hour session, but also through my dream life, so
Mm-hmm.
that I'll often wake up. Normally, I'll wake up in the morning or the day after and share dreams that on a visceral level don't seem to relate to my life, but could have strong meaning for the client,
Yeah.
you know. And sometimes psychic and physical material comes up during the session, but more often than not lately it's been coming up in dreams, and that's been very helpful for certain people. I've got some people who've stuck with me and worked with me all year on this, you know. So yeah, so the distance work I think has a lot of potential. It's
Mm-hmm.
just so weird that people have a hard time buying it.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been in this doing online work, online healing since COVID. That's when I started.
Me
Um,
too.
and it is interesting um how some people are very open to it and others are
Hmm.
still like, yeah, I'm not so sure about this online stuff. But
Yeah.
I think it is it's not for everybody, but there are people out there that are looking for it. And you coming on podcasts and continuing to put your story out there is going to call those people in for sure.
I certainly hope so. You know, I certainly hope so. And you're right. And what I found working with people online is there were certain challenges that really, to be blunt, pissed me off a little bit.
Right?
um, uh, maybe I'll instead of talking about do I have time to talk about
Yeah,
one little story here? It's
absolutely.
just popping into my head right now, you know.
Absolutely.
Is I in the beginning I had a lot of people interested. I was doing a lot of testing in 2019, and then just when COVID started was when I was ready to launch the distance work on my YouTube channel, because that was my main base, and tell people I'm getting ready to do distance work. If it wasn't for coming along with this distance work, I would have been without income for the entire of COVID because I couldn't do private retreats with people,
Right.
right? And I would have people come in, and I had some good work with people, but I had difficulty with people sticking with it, that they wouldn't stick very often. And that got frustrating for me. And then one day I had a session for a guy, and in the middle of the session, so I'm on my bed, I've got the breathwork music going on, and I'm moaning, I'm doing a lot of moaning, there's physical sensations. And then I see these big ears. And then the ears, I can't remember much else about the big ears, but there was just this sensation of big ears. And I thought about my client. My client didn't have big ears. And I come out of the session, and I said to him, I go, did you have big ears when you were a kid or something? He says, oh yeah, I had these huge ears, and I was very ashamed of them. And I would actually, the kids in school would tease me for my ears, and I would actually make a joke out of it and pull them out myself and pull them out to the side, imitating like I was Dumbo or something like this. And I was like, wow, that's. I was just amazed that this information would come through. And then and there was other information too that really resonated with his life. And then I said, so do you want to book again? And he said, no, I'm good for now. I was like, okay. And then I phoned him back, like called him back a couple of days later. And I was like, look, man, because we had a good relationship otherwise.
Mhm.
I said, I've just got to know, do you have any doubt that that information that I got from you was related to your life and related to your disorder? You said, oh no, no, not at all. That was completely my work, my life. I have no
Mhm.
doubt about it. I said, so then why wouldn't you want to continue the work? Like, it's
Right.
clear this is helping you heal. And he said to me two things. He said, I don't think I'm looking for this. I think I'm looking for a kind of a guru. And I was like, okay, well, that's one thing. And then
At
he
least he's
also,
honest.
yeah. And then he also said that he felt like I was trying to sell him something. And I was like, okay, well, I need to look at that, you know. And I think to a certain extent he was right. I was sort of trying to prove myself to him a little
Right.
bit, not
Right.
necessarily sell, but prove it to him. But I was just beside myself because I'm the kind of person, like if I had bipolar disorder and I thought there was someone out there who could really tangibly show me that this work can help you heal,
Right.
it would be my priority because this disorder destroys your life, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And yet for most people, it's a no-go. It's a no-go,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, I think it really does come down to they are one, they're afraid to do the work because of what might come
Mhm,
up. And
mhm,
two, they're
mhm.
afraid that it really might not work.
Yeah. So I say people are afraid of two things. One is that nothing's going to happen. And two is that something's going to happen.
Right. Yep.
They're afraid of both
Absolutely.
outcomes. So
Absolutely.
what do you
Sean,
do?
thank you so much for
Yeah.
coming on the show. I've really enjoyed
Thanks,
this
Tina.
conversation. What
Thank
is your
you.
website and where can people find you?
They can find me on my website at bipolarawakenings.com. I don't have a huge social, but my YouTube channel is pretty strong still, Bipolar Awakenings. But bipolarawakenings.com, you'll find my books there and links to everything else.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Metamorphosis Project podcast. I hope today's episode brought you inspiration, joy, and a spark of empowerment. Remember, transformation is an incredible journey, and every single step you take towards self-care and healing brings you closer to the life you truly desire. If this episode uplifted you, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support helps us to share this journey of hope, resilience, and joy with many listeners. For more tips, support, and inspiration, come and visit us at designyourexistence.com. Until next time, keep growing, keep healing, and keep shining brightly. You are absolutely worth every bit of love and care you give to yourself. Take care, stay joyful, and be well.